listen to? Johnny. Do you agree with Johnny?
No. I think he's being a bit... well, there's 2 points to it. Look, the world's always changing. I think my children spend too much time in front of their phones, computer screens and things. Our parents thought that television was going to rot our brains. Their parents thought that Elvis Presley was going to lead to wreck and ruin. You know, votes for women, short skirts, the list goes on. But the thing is that people did protest. People did speak up. People did shout for change. And to say 40% didn't vote because they're not being listened to, well, shout louder, protest more, get out in the streets, say something. Don't sit back and cop out with, we're not being listened to. I'm horrified.
How do you feel about it when you hear that email, Scott?
Oh, I'm all for challenging the status quo, absolutely, but have a reason to do it, I guess. And I agree with Jenny there. If you didn't vote, and if you're throwing your toys effectively and saying, well, I'm not going to vote, well, don't moan when something doesn't happen. Get out and do something about it. I think, there are traditional norms there for a reason, but we should be challenging people on a day-to-day basis, but have a good argument for it.
Do you think the world is moving past old prejudices and simply not everyone's realised it yet? Or do you suspect that prejudices of some sort or another just get reinvented in each generation?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's probably a fair point. Something that we might have seen as prejudice, or we might think as prejudice now because of the thinking from 20, 40, 60 years ago, in 20 years or so might not be. It might just be the norm. And I guess, that's what I say about challenging people. If you can challenge it, have a good argument about it. We're probably more accepting about a lot of things now. And we're talking about gender equality and racial abuse and these sorts of things. We're probably more aware of what's going on than what people might have been previously. I think the good thing is it's being talked about and challenged.
But
right.
Doesn't that lead back to what Margaret Court did say and
Okay.
how unacceptable that actually is?
Let's slip that in quickly. The Margaret Court tennis saga. Your thoughts on that? She's a former women's number one. They reckon, a lot of people reckon, the International Tennis Hall of Fame, the greatest female tennis player of all time. And at the Australian Open at Melbourne Park, players play on the Margaret Court Arena, but not with as much pride anymore. There's a move afoot to have the arena boycotted, matches rescheduled because of her public opposition to same-sex marriage, and lately she's been even stronger. Tennis is full of lesbians and transgender children influenced by the devil. So, the question is whether the venue, as the Australian Prime Minister says, is named after her because of her tennis prowess, and you set the rest of it aside, or whether what she says can't be ignored.
Can't be ignored. It's hate speech.
Yep.
It is hate speech. If she committed a murder, I think they'd get her name off there quick smart. And I know this isn't nearly as serious, but it's hate speech, and her name should come off that arena because it actually should be something of shame to the Australians, not to be celebrated.
See, I agree, and I think it seems to be somebody screaming out for attention. That's what I mean about having a good argument. If you've got a good argument, then step up. But this just, did it need to be said? Hopefully most people will just turn a blind eye to it.
All right, thank you both. We're going to go out on the music from perhaps the best album of all time and the most startling song on it, The Day in the Life, and the famous long last chord. It took all the Beatles on keyboards 9 takes to finish the song, A Day in the Life, this way. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Scott Campbell, Jenny Morton on the panel today.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, a property in the Christchurch suburb of Hallswell is at the centre of a large police investigation into the mysterious disappearance of a builder, Michael McGrath. Auckland accommodation providers will be hit with big rate increases after councillors vote in favour of a bed tax. Christchurch is sitting on a mental health time bomb with a desperate need for more mental health services. One of the deadliest bombs in Kabul's history kills 80 and wounds more than 400. A $1.8 million fund for extra security in dairies. And should Auckland councillors bring their own lunch to council meetings? That's what's been suggested in the Hutt Valley. We turned up at lunchtime today to see what was being served up.
RNZ News at 5. Talofa lava. Good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Auckland councillors have voted 11-8 in favour of a controversial bed tax. The vote on the targeted rates on motels and hotels follows a heated debate in the Finance Committee meeting. The council's governing body will also vote on the tax as part of the annual budget this afternoon. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says nearly $14 million will be raised from the rate, which will go towards paying half the promotional costs of the council's tourism arm, ATEED. The rate will add between $1 and $3 a night for motels and $3 to $6 for hotels. Phil Goff says it's about a fair sharing of costs for events that benefit the accommodation industry.
Why should the general ratepayers be landed with a bill for which the hotel industry makes hundreds of extra dollars per room per night during the events that we organise on their behalf?
Phil Goff says he's consulted with the industry and sought legal advice, and the move was not illegal. Councillors also voted in favour of a 2.5% rates rise and a living wage for council workers. Christchurch police are about to make an announcement about the search for missing man Michael McGrath, who vanished almost 2 weeks ago. Mr McGrath, who's a builder in Christchurch, was last seen at his home in Holswell, where he lives alone. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says officers raided 2 houses yesterday as part of the investigation and forensically examined 2 vehicles. The police are now seriously concerned about him. Mr Sweeney says anyone who might have seen Mr McGrath needs to come forward. Dairy owners at risk of violent robberies have dismissed the government's offer to help pay for extra security, saying it won't stop offenders. The Police Minister, Paula Bennett, announced a $1.8 million fund this afternoon. Laura Tupou reports.
Paula Bennett says the owners of up to 600 shops considered high risk can apply for money to buy things like panic alarms, fog cannons and safes for cash and cigarettes. The police will pay up to half the cost, but owners could get a larger cut in exceptional cases. But the owner of Fresh Veggie Mart in Auckland's Mangere East, Jongmu Lee, says that won't cut it. He says his shop has lots of security and yet he's been robbed frequently and it's only getting worse. He says the onus shouldn't be on shop owners and he would like to see harsher punishments for offenders. Ko Laura Tupou aho.
The Green Party has criticised biosecurity officials, saying they've failed to contain a parasite lethal to oysters. Bonamia austriae has been discovered at 2 oyster farms on Stewart Island, the first time it's been found outside the Marlborough Sounds in Nelson. The Greens co-leader Materia Ture says the parasite poses a serious threat to the bluff oyster industry and needs to be better contained.
Years of lack of funding, lack of support in biosecurity has meant that these risks are more likely now. It's the second in just a few weeks of a major biosecurity incursion, and that needs to be taken very seriously.
The Greens co-leader Materia Ture. The family of a woman believed to have been one of this country's youngest victims of a rare asbestos-related cancer is continuing her court battle, even though she died in December. Deanna Trevathan was just 45 and it's believed she may have inhaled asbestos dust when she hugged her father as a child, leading to mesothelioma. She sought compensation from ACC but was turned down because the illness is only covered as a work-related injury. Her sister-in-law, Angela Calver, says Deanna's father was an electrician and a profession known to have suffered workplace exposure to asbestos, and she often accompanied him to building sites in the school holidays.
She would play with the offcuts, she would help him clean up, stuff like that, as you do as a little kid. If it was raining, make a dam with all of the offcut. Dee was a bit of a tomboy as a child, and she used to like going to work with Dad.
Angela Calver, the family is trying to extend the range of mesothelioma sufferers eligible for ACC coverage. There's still no claim of responsibility for yesterday's deadly truck bomb attack in the Afghan capital of Kabul. At least 90 people were killed and as many as 400 injured when a truck exploded inside the city's heavily fortified diplomatic quarter. The bombing, one of the deadliest in the long Afghan war, happened just as the US weighs up sending in more troops to fight the ongoing Taliban insurgency. It's 5 past 5. To sport, and if there's one piece of advice retiring Silver Fern defender Anna Harrison could give her younger self when she made the team as a teenager, it would be to rein in her forthrightness. Harrison, who's 34 and played 88 netball tests for New Zealand, has announced she's stepping away from the international game. A two-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist and World Cup winner, Harrison made her debut against South Africa as a 19-year-old and says sometimes she didn't help herself by being too outspoken.
I'm quite a strong-minded athlete in the sense that I really need to understand, and I'm not afraid to voice that, and at times it can come out wrong and you can upset people. So, communication would be the one that comes to mind the most.
Anna Harrison will continue playing for the Northern Mystics. The All Blacks fullback Ben Smith will this weekend become the most capped Highlanders player. He's been named to start in their Super Rugby derby against the Crusaders in Christchurch on Saturday night, his 128th game for the club. He surpasses former All Black hooker Anton Oliver. All Black wing Nehe Milner-Skudder's long-awaited return is the highlight of the Hurricanes team, named to play the Force in Perth on Saturday. Meanwhile, it will be Gatland against Gatland in Whangarei on Saturday night as the British and Irish Lions kick off their tour of New Zealand against the provincial Barbarians. The North Harbour first five Bryn Gatland has been named to start for the Barbarians and will square off against his father Warren, the Lions coach, for family bragging rights. That's the news.
Saving trees? And why is it that you've got staff that are dangling out of helicopters? What's that all about?
Well, when you're collecting seed from tall trees, that's around about the only way to do it.
Saving birds?
If you want to save the things you love to eat, you have to kill the things that are eating them. And that's what we're going to be doing. So always at the heart of what we do in DOC is saving species.
Saving dairy owners?
It's attempting to be buying off a particular group of people for a very small amount of money, totally out of proportion to the problem that's been caused for them, and it sounds more like an election year policy than making policy to make New Zealand a better place.
Time well spent. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espinel weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, a conservation crisis has been averted in Auckland's Hauraki Gulf, with the rare Brady's whale no longer under threat. Marine scientist Rochelle Constantine tells us how. And after 10, Australian actor, dancer and now writer Genevieve Chang, whose journey of self-discovery took her to the heart of Shanghai's burlesque scene. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers today. Rain with heavy falls developing tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Mainly fine, but a few showers west of Tauranga and north of Hamilton tomorrow. Areas of morning fog as well. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Wellington, cloudy periods, the odd shower in the east. Nelson and Buller, mainly fine. Westland, a few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy with the odd shower about the coast. Areas of low cloud or fog. Fiordland, fine, but low cloud or fog about the lakes. And for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy with a few showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Nice to have you back. Coming up, Auckland's bed tax, Christchurch's mental health service crisis, mass murder by bomb in Kabul, and a man who's already played the Lions in Whangarei. He did so 67 years ago. We're also on standby to go to Christchurch, where the search for Michael McGrath has been taking place. A major police occupation, effectively, of 2 properties. Our reporter Maya Burry is at a police media conference at Christchurch Central Police Station, and we will cross to her the moment it is over. Let's begin in Auckland, where the controversial bed tax has got the green light. Councillors voted 11 to 8 this afternoon in favour of the targeted rate on accommodation providers. It's a victory for Mayor Phil Goff, who proposed it as a new source of income for the council. It will go to a final council meeting at the end of the month, but as Sharon Brett-Kelly reports, opponents have warned it will scare off investors and put hotel and motel operators out of business.
The new targeted rate will see motels paying between $1 and $3 per room per night and hotels up to $6. The rate will raise nearly $14 million, which will fund half the council's tourism arm AT's promotion costs. Phil Goff argues that it will take the burden off ratepayers and free up money to pay for much needed infrastructure. But Councillor John Watson said it was unfair on suburban moteliers who get no support from AT.
These people are being treated unfairly, and it seems to me that the kind of inference is that they're the collateral damage in this one.
Councillor Greg Sayers said it was fundamentally flawed and the council was likely to face a legal challenge which would cost ratepayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. He said if it was better designed, councillors would not have been split over the issue.
It's just a very blunt and, quite frankly, an inappropriate financial instrument for the council to be using.
Wayne Walker called it an incredibly messy charge that will put off investors and put people out of work.
And I can tell you that there will be operators that will be going out of business as a consequence of this, and I know one of them.
Christine Fletcher said the targeted rate was desperate.
To me, this has been clumsy, it's flawed, and I think the net result of it will be that government won't want to have a bar of it and we will never get around to getting the visitor levy.
But Desley Simpson said it was a tool that the council should use. It was a charge that visitors could afford.
So it's a cup of coffee and a Big Mac tax.
Round it up.
It's not a lot for the consumer. It can be passed on, and it is the visitor that will pay for it.
Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore said the rate isn't perfect, but it gets money back from those who benefit.
Would a bed tax be a more flamboyant and better way to do it? Most certainly. But is that tool in our toolbox? No, it's not.
Mayor Phil Goff said it was about fairly sharing costs for events that benefit the accommodation industry.
Why should the general ratepayers be landed with a bill for which the hotel industry makes hundreds of extra dollars per room per night during the events that we organise on their behalf? Why is it always dumped on the ratepayer, and hasn't the ratepayer got the right to share that burden with the direct beneficiaries?
Phil Goff said he had consulted with the industry and sought legal advice, and the move was not illegal. Councillors also voted in favour of a 2.5% rates rise and a living wage for council workers. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
So just to repeat, 11 to 8 in favour this afternoon, a targeted rate on accommodation providers. We'd love your feedback on that, 2101, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Christchurch is sitting on a mental health time bomb, with more mental health services desperately needed now. That's the opinion of Dr. Sue Bagshaw, the head of a youth health clinic in our second largest city, which tries to respond to a growing demand for mental health services with half a nurse and half a doctor. She fears the high rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, among children from parts of the city most affected by the earthquakes will compound as those children reach adolescence, putting them at real risk. And today, Checkpoint spoke to a senior staff member at the Canterbury DHB who says mental health services in the city are underfunded, overwhelmed and near breaking point. Now, at 10:30 this morning, we went to the Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, offering to record an interview at any stage during the day or live during the program tonight. He declined, as he did yesterday after the Auditor General's report into mental health, and as he has done on more than a dozen occasions this year. But the government's own figures show a dramatic rise in demand for mental health services in Christchurch since the earthquakes, unmatched by a commensurate funding increase. And that means some people who desperately need mental health care are missing out.
We turn people away every day.
Dr. Sue Bagshaw, chairperson of the Korowai Youth Wellbeing Trust, also known as 298 Youth Health.
So we get referrals from school counsellors, we actually get referrals from the hospital.
So schools, the hospital and other agencies refer young people to Korowai.
And we get referrals from A&E.
And Korowai services are in demand and the need is often urgent.
The problem we have is that although we get referrals from secondary mental health care and we get referrals from the ED, we actually have no resource for mental health.
None.
We have 0.5 FTE doctor and 0.5 FTE nurse, and we have income from the PHO per capita registration.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. So 0.5, so that's full-time equivalent. So you have half a doctor and half a nurse.
That's 20 hours doctor, 20 hours nurse.
Are you having to turn people away?
Yep, all the time.
And are they desperate people?
Yeah, absolutely. They get, our poor receptionists get really worn out by having to explain our situation to angry parents especially.
This is quantified The Canterbury DHB's own figures show that demand for child and youth mental health services has risen by 73% since the earthquakes. And reviewing the 2015-16 year at the DHB, Parliament's Health Committee recorded an increase in demand of an extra 300 children per month. A senior figure in mental health at the DHB, speaking on condition of anonymity, told me it's not even a secret that they can't cope with the demand. Everyone knows it. So they're sent to Korowai. And you have half a doctor and half a nurse, and they would know that, wouldn't they?
Yep.
And so that's a sign of their desperation too, one would extrapolate.
Oh, without a doubt, absolutely.
Everyone's trying, the DHB, Korowai Trust, schools. But the problem is the young children traumatised by the earthquakes are now approaching adolescence with PTSD. And this too can be quantified very precisely.
We have now around 320 families, and we've been following the families since late 2012 and early 2013, and then we've picked up more families each year.
That's Associate Professor Kathleen Liberty from the University of Canterbury, who's been running a longitudinal study of children in post-earthquake Christchurch. And in some eastern and southern suburbs, children
are experiencing many symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
The symptoms vary: anger, volatility, problems sleeping, bedwetting. But both Kathleen Liberty and Sue Bagshaw also describe children
who are feeling suicidal, who are self-harming.
Self-harm, even children as young as 9, talking about suicide.
And Kathleen Liberty says at its most severe, the level of post-quake PTSD is on par with children in homes where there is domestic violence or where a parent has died unexpectedly, as in a car crash. But even then,
when you have a child who's had a terrible home experience or a death in their family, come to school or go to a GP's office, there's a number of community resources that are available that can come around and help support the family. Specialist service can be available at schools to help support them. But when you have a whole community struck by disaster and you have 3 times as many children with the symptoms as you might find in another community, actually our rate was 5 times elevated risk, then you don't have the community resources at a level sufficient to meet the demand for all those children who are suffering from this condition.
is there enough support to help the people working in mental health in Christchurch deal with these children?
Well, actually, no, there is not enough.
And now these children are becoming teens, and at Korowai Trust, with its half doctor and half nurse, where they're forced to turn people away every day, Dr. Sue Bagshaw says approaching adolescence with untreated PTSD heightens risk.
So we're sitting on a time bomb. I've been talking to the Ministry of Health over and over about the fact that we need to do something now to prepare for this coming through, because it's obvious nothing is being done for them, even though it's too little too late, really. And we need to prepare right now. We need to have psychiatrists and psychologists in primary care right now ready for these kids.
Because they're coming, ready or not.
Absolutely.
Dr. Sue Bagshaw, ending that report once again. The Health Minister, Dr. Jonathan Coleman, declined our invitation to be interviewed on Checkpoint. We're going to stay in Christchurch. The search for Michael McGrath, who's been missing for more than a week. Police have searched 2 properties in the suburb of Hallswell, and 2 vehicles were examined by specialist teams yesterday. These are very pointed searches, officers in forensic overalls. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says the disappearance of the 49-year-old Mr. McGrath is completely out of character, and the police have serious concerns about his safety. He's just held a media conference outside the Christchurch Central Police Station. Our reporter Maya Barry is there and joins us now. Hi Maya, what did the police have to say?
Hi John, the police had to say today that they're still hoping to find Mr. McGrath alive. As you've said, he was reported missing from his Hallswell home on Checkett's Avenue on the 23rd of May, and the police say his disappearance is out of character. So today, just at the police station, Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney said it had executed search warrants for 2 homes as part of the investigation and forensically examined 3 vehicles. They also said that they are speaking to one person of interest who they still need to eliminate from this missing persons inquiry.
What can you tell us about the search of the 2 properties? Because they were very pointed searches. They were large, tents were put in, there were people in overalls, and real forensic care was being taken.
It does seem that way, John, but we haven't been able to get a lot of information about these 2 searches. Today at this stand-up, the police were not taking any questions, but they said they are hoping to do another stand-up tomorrow where they will be able to provide some more information.
OK, what do we know about Michael McGrath himself, Maya?
Well, we know he's a 49-year-old. He's a builder based in Horswell and Christchurch, and we know he lives alone, but that's really all we do know about him at the moment, and the police are appealing for anyone who has seen Mr McGrath, any sightings of him since he disappeared, 2 weeks ago. They're still asking the public to come forward with information.
Maya Barry, who was at the media stand-up held by Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney just after 5 o'clock this evening. Thank you, Maya. And obviously Christchurch Police would like to hear from anyone at all who can help them in any way with their inquiries into the disappearance of Michael McGrath. 5:21. The Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has called it a crime against humanity. At least 90 people were killed and as many as 400 injured in yesterday's suicide truck bomb attack in Kabul's diplomatic quarter. The massive blast was caused by explosives hidden inside a sewage tanker, which was allowed to slip into the heavily fortified area without any suspicions being raised. The BBC's Caroline Hawley has this report.
You could see from miles away the force of this explosion. A massive bomb at a busy Kabul intersection, hitting commuters on their way to work, children on their way to school. It was a bomb so powerful it shattered windows up to a mile away, leaving a trail of horrific destruction. One witness said it was like an earthquake. There were so many casualties, security vehicles had to double up as ambulances. The Afghan government said hospitals in the capital were in dire need of blood.
I was working in the office when a powerful blast happened. I collapsed under the desk and received injuries from shattered windows.
Most of the dead and injured were civilians, including many women and children. Among those killed is Mohammed Nazir, who worked for the BBC as a driver. The BBC said he was a popular colleague with a young family. The area where the bomb went off is supposed to be one of the most secure parts of the capital, walking distance from the presidential palace. The BBC's Haroon Najafzadeh was at the scene soon after the attack.
It was a water tanker or a lorry full of explosive that hit this strategic location right in the heart of Kabul. It's very close to the German embassy, Indian embassy, French and British embassies.
And even in a country that's become painfully used to violence, the scale of this attack has been a shock.
Security in Afghanistan has been deteriorating for some time. Most of the country was under government control back in 2014, when NATO ended its combat mission. Since then, large swathes of territory have fallen to the Taliban. Most of Helmand, where so many British soldiers lost their lives, is now in Taliban hands. So is much of the province of Kunduz, and IS has established a presence in Nangarhar. The Americans have over 8,000 troops in Afghanistan. The UK has about 500, but US commanders are now asking for several thousand more.
At one point we had even 150,000 foreign military boots on the ground. That did not weaken or destroy the Taliban. So a few thousand more today is not going to be a solution. Yes, in the short term it is going to give some support and better training to the Afghan government and Afghan security forces, but the insurgency will still be there.
Afghan intelligence are blaming an affiliate of the Taliban, the Haqqani network. But no group has yet admitted to carrying out one of the worst attacks Kabul has ever seen.
That's the BBC's Caroline Hawley. With 400 people injured, that death toll of 90 is expected to rise sharply. Let's head home again. An Auckland family is vowing to carry on the battle for justice for a woman believed to have been one of this country's youngest victims of a rare asbestos-related cancer. Diana Trevethan died in December from mesothelioma, Cancer found in those who've been exposed to toxic asbestos dust. She was just 45. Anne-Marie May has the story.
In October 2015, Deanna Trevarthen was diagnosed with mesothelioma and initially responded well to chemotherapy. When that stopped working in January last year, her family fundraised through Give a Little so she could access the cancer treatment drug Keytruda. That too stopped working last October, and Deanna Trevarthen died early in December. Her sister-in-law Angela Calvert says following the initial diagnosis, the family were advised to put in a claim because most mesothelioma cases arise from workplace exposure to asbestos and are covered by ACC. However, she says Deanna had never worked in such an environment, and her only link with asbestos was through her father's job as an electrician, a profession now recognised as having been exposed to workplace asbestos decades ago. It is believed she may have developed mesothelioma as a result of inhaling asbestos fibres from her father's clothing when she hugged him as a child. Angela Calvert says Deanna also regularly accompanied her father to jobs on building sites in the school holidays.
She would play with the offcuts, she would help him clean up, stuff like that, as you do as a little kid. If it was raining, make a dam with all of the offcut. Dee was a bit of a tomboy as a child, and she used to like going to work with Dad.
The lawyer taking the case, Beatrix Woodhouse, says it was clear Deanna Trevarthen could not claim under ACC's work-related provisions as the asbestos exposure occurred when she was quite young. She says about 95% of mesothelioma cases arise from inhaling asbestos fibres, and the court case will consider whether Deanna Trevarthen could have claimed compensation as a result of accidental inhalation.
The parties are in consensus that there was inhalation of asbestos at some point. It's just working out whether this inhalation will satisfy the provision of the Act that we're bringing the case forward under.
Meanwhile, Angela Calver says Deanna Trevarthen's father would have been covered by ACC if he had developed mesothelioma, and they just want the same coverage extended to her. She points out ACC was set up to be a no-fault insurer.
So do your job. Be our no-fault insurer. It was no fault of Deanna's that she swallowed these things. It wasn't known back then just how dangerous it was. And part of the reason that ACC was formed was to stop the lottery effect and the suing like happens in the US.
Angela Calver says the battle to fund Deanna Trevarthen's treatment was very stressful, and they don't want another family to suffer in the same way. ACC was approached but declined to comment while the case is before the court. A hearing is likely to take place later this year. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
The government has unveiled details of a $1.8 million fund to help stop robberies at dairy, superettes and other local stores. The Police Minister Paula Bennett says the owners of up to 600 shops deemed high risk will be able to apply for money to buy security measures like panic alarms, DNA spray, fog cannons and time safes for cash and cigarettes. But some Auckland dairy owners say it won't make much of a difference. Here's Sarah Robson.
Jong-Moo Lee has owned Fresh Veggie Mart in Mangere East for 17 years with his wife. He says he's decked out the shop with security systems, but he's still afraid.
I got everything, security camera, alarm system, padlock, everything here, but they come here.
Mr. Lee says he's been attacked twice this year by teenagers. They wanted cigarettes and cash and weren't deterred by his security systems.
Actually, the robbery, they don't mind the security system, they don't mind the police. They're not worried about the punishment because still daytime they come here quickly and stealing and ran away. The security system useless. Yeah, that's the situation.
Mr. Lee says the police have investigated both attacks, but they've never told him if anyone's been caught. He says the problem's only getting worse. The Assistant Police Commissioner, John Timms, says there has been a spike in the number of robberies and some of them are more violent.
If you think back 10, 20 years ago, kids were doing shoplifting. What's happened in 2017 is 3 or 4 kids, for whatever reason, are deciding to go in, steal cigarettes, alcohol, cash, food, and commit violence on the shopkeeper. So yes, it has escalated. The reason why, that's what we're looking into. What has changed?
The Police Minister, Paula Bennett, says dairy owners and other shopkeepers have been asking for more help to prevent violent robberies.
Some of them really are small business, owner-operated, that are barely making ends meet. We've heard that call from them and we want to help keep them safe. So, we will step up where it's needed, and this is an area that we see as being needed at the moment.
Mrs Bennett says the funding will be available to the 500 or 600 shops the police consider high risk. The police will pay up to half the cost of the security measures, around $1,500, but in some exceptional cases they could contribute a larger share. The owner of the Kingsford supermarket in Mangere, Kamaljit Singh, says the government's announcement isn't going to stop crime, but at least it's something.
I don't know what to say. I mean, end of the day, any money towards helping the shopkeepers is a good step, is a positive step, but I think they should also be looking at how do they stop crime, reduce crime, right from the beginning.
Mr Singh says a worker at his shop suffered facial and head injuries in a violent attack last month. Since then, he's ramped up security, and mobile panic alarms and a smoke cannon will be installed next week. For Checkpoint, Sarah Robson, Aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint, a group of passengers on board a Malaysia Airlines flight are being hailed as heroes for their actions after restraining a man who threatened to blow up the plane. The government's, we've just had that. Actually, we would really like to hear from you if you have had difficulty accessing mental health services or you've been discharged from a facility with nowhere to go. That latter stuff is what the Auditor General was talking about in the report that was released yesterday. We're particularly interested also in the experience of people in Christchurch, mums, dads, parents, guardians, trying to get care for young and adolescent children from the really stretched services down there. Feel free to contact us via text 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, radionz.co.nz, and we are happy to deal with you without using your name, obviously. Please do get in touch. After Katrina with the headlines, Nona with business, but here is the 5:32 headlines with Katrina Batten.
Right on time. Christchurch police say they're talking to a person of interest in the search for Michael McGrath, who vanished almost 2 weeks ago. Mr McGrath, who's a builder, was last seen at his home in Hallswell, where he lives alone. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney says officers raided 2 houses yesterday as part of the investigation and forensically examined 2 vehicles. Auckland councillors have voted in favour of a controversial bed tax. The vote on the targeted rate on motels and hotels follows a heated debate at the Finance Committee meeting. The council's governing body will also vote on the tax, which will raise nearly $14 million for Auckland's tourism body. The rate will add between $1 and $3 a night for motels and $3 to $6 for hotels. A Lower Hutt man has been charged with receiving stolen tickets to an All Blacks Lions test match. They were taken from a letterbox at a Wellington house early last month. Police say they received a tip-off after the tickets were listed on TradeMe. The Greens have criticised biosecurity officials who say have failed to contain a parasite lethal to oysters. The parasite has been discovered at 2 Stewart Island oyster farms, the first time it's been found outside of the Marlborough Sounds in Nelson. The Greens co-leader Materia Ture says the parasite poses a serious threat to the bluff oyster industry and needs to be better contained. A court case about a woman who died from a rare asbestos-related cancer will try to gain Accident Compensation Corporation cover for a wider range of sufferers. Deanna Trevathan, who was 45, died in December from mesothelioma, which develops from exposure to toxic asbestos dust. It's believed she was exposed either through time on building sites with her electrician father during school holidays or inhaling asbestos from his clothing when she hugged him as a child. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Turning to business news now with Nona Peltier. Air New Zealand has raised its earning forecast. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Your name is not Nona Peltier. Air New Zealand has raised its earning forecast.
No, it isn't.
It isn't. It would be a long name. It would be prescient because they have raised their earnings forecast.
They have. And actually quite a lot.
What's behind that?
Well, I'll tell you what. They were expecting to make between 475 and 525 million underlying earnings. That's before tax and other things. But Now they expect to make more than 525 million because of the strong growth that they've had in passenger numbers. And it's really been spectacular. And that's despite increased competition. So a lot more passengers, a lot more competition.
And lest we forget, tourism, foreign tourism was the #1 driver of foreign exchange into New Zealand,
yeah,
right?
Very much so.
Ahead of dairy now by quite a margin.
Yes, indeed. But of course, dairy prices are on the rise.
Yeah, good point.
And as a matter of fact, that segues very nice into
Oh,
our
nice.
other piece. Get that.
Go,
Yes, indeed. That's right. We have the terms of trade. A lot of people might be thinking, what are the terms of trade? And really, it's quite simply the value of our exports versus how much we need to borrow. So basically, we exported a lot more than the value was, a lot more than we have in the past. In fact, we're at a 44-year high.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we have to borrow less as a result of that, which is great for our economy. It shows that we're getting quite good prices for our export prices, dairy prices, but also forestry. 46-year high for forestry. I mean, it's incredible. But okay, so the volumes have been down. However, the prices have been better. And so will that continue? Probably not, but never mind. It's pretty good on the day. Never mind that, right? So where are we at then? Air New Zealand's share price rose as a result of their very strong
earnings forecast.
Yep.
They
went up 5%. That's 15 cents to $3.02, which was the highest level in a year. And that helped propel, of course, the NZX Top 50 Index. It rose 0.4%. by 32 points to 7,451. And our New Zealand dollar is just a little bit weaker than it was yesterday at 70.7 US cents, but higher against the Australian. In fact, it's at a 4-month high there at 95.5 Australian cents, 54.9 British pence.
Nona Peltier, our hard-working Auckland business reporter, thank you so much. Nona was talking about airlines. Let's stay with them. A group of passengers on board a Malaysian Airlines flight have been praised for their quick action after an onboard drama in which a man threatened to blow up the plane and tried to enter the cockpit. The man was seen behaving very erratically before he jumped up claiming he had a bomb. He ended up being tackled and pinned to the floor by other passengers who managed to subdue him. The Airbus A330, which was just half an hour into a flight from Melbourne to Kuala Lumpur, was forced to turn back to Melbourne. The ABC's Stephanie Corsetti has the story.
We have a passenger claiming to have an explosive device, tried to enter the cockpit, has been overpowered by passengers. However, we'd like to land and have the device checked out.
This is the moment the pilot of MH128 radioed in about the potential bomb threat. It's alleged a 25-year-old Sri Lankan national from Dandenong on a student visa disturbed the flight before he was pinned down by passengers. Police say he has a history of mental health issues and he wasn't carrying an explosive device. The Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police is Graham Ashton.
He had been released from psychiatric care from Melbourne, from the Monash Medical Centre yesterday, and from there we believe he's purchased a ticket on this plane, having been released from that facility, and then ventured out to the airport and got on that plane last night.
Former footballer Andrew Leoncelli was on board MH128 and says a group of men had the man on the ground.
It's like, I'm going to blow the plane up. He was agitated, is the best description. 100% he was agitated. And what we've learned is that 2 or 3 brave young Aussies have taken him on and got him to the ground.
Mr Leoncelli says the man was carrying a large object. Police say it wasn't explosive and it got through security screening because it didn't pose a threat. Another passenger, Arif Chowdhury, described it as a terrifying experience. He says they then had to endure a long wait inside the aircraft.
About 1.5 hours, we sit in the plane. The guys were still there on the floor. After 1.5 hours, special force come in with all the equipment, gun, helmet, and I'm pretty sure there was a special bomb squad and special force, and they just take him away.
This passenger, Laura, says the worst part of the ordeal was the mistaken belief that there was an explosive on board.
I genuinely did think that was it. Like, I thought the plane was going to go down, the bomb was going to go off. I really did think that I was going to die.
Police have described it as an isolated incident and unrelated to terrorism. Superintendent Tony Langdon.
We believe that the actions of the passengers and the crew are quite heroic. They managed to calm the situation and allow the aircraft to return safely, and we can't commend them highly enough.
That report from the ABC. Lots of feedback coming in on Auckland's bed tax. Hi, John. If the bed tax means money is freed up to pay workers a living wage, I'm all for it. Cheers, Pip Kelly. Thanks, Pip. It's been interesting to hear the debate regarding the bed tax. Apart from the issues discussed, I would suggest that by taxing hotels and motels, i.e. official professional accommodation providers, this tax would in effect subsidise the vast number of Airbnb providers. After all, they benefit from increased numbers of visitors to Auckland. Also, moreover, I would imagine that few, if any, pay tax on their income. It just seems a very clumsy and unfair proposal. Lots of feedback, and it's fairly polarised along the lines of those two. Thank you. It's really good to hear from you. As the council were in the midst of their debates and discussions over the bed tax, they broke for lunch, as people do, a lunch that was paid for by ratepayers. Now, if you are a regular Checkpoint listener, thank you. And you will remember earlier this week that Hutt City Councillor Campbell Barry called for his colleagues in the Hutt to bring their own lunch, saying it's hypocritical to be striving for cost effectiveness while giving councillors buffet lunches for free. So today, our tireless reporter Zach Fleming went down to Auckland's Town Hall to see what those attending the Finance and Performance Committee were being fed, courtesy of the ratepayer.
Yeah, John, we're down in the Town Hall building at the moment. It's around 1:10 at the moment. The councillors were supposed to break for lunch at midday, but they're still hard at work up there. We've managed to sneak into the lunchroom and see what's on offer here. We've got the usual fare, some tea, some coffee, some orange juice, some cold water, though most of their ice is melted now. There's some sweets if you want, some Louise slice, some chocolate brownie, some ginger slice. And then if we come along here, we've got the savoury options. We have 3 salads, so the councillors are stocking up on their veggies, getting their 5+ a day. We got a pasta salad, what looks like a tomato and feta salad, and just your standard tomato, cucumber, green salad there. And then here we have two hot dishes that look like we're going to reveal some magic. Underneath this one we got some vegetarian options. It looks like a kind of almost a burger stack sort of thing. So we got looks like some kumara, some pumpkin and some mushrooms. So again, the council is stocking up on their 5+ a day. And under the next one, I assume we're going to have some meat. So we got a whole lot of chicken. It probably looks, I think, just chicken legs. I would probably guesstimate we have around about 20, maybe more than that chicken legs in here. So if you were going to ask me to take a guess, I'd say we could probably feed about 30 or so people, maybe 40 if the councillors are on a diet trying to get their summer body ready in the middle of winter.
Their summer body ready. It's June, bro. There was also warm bread and butter, so by any definition, a healthy, tasty, hot lunch. And those lunches cost Auckland ratepayers around $150,000 a year, feeding both councillor and local board meetings, though that figure is down a third on what it was 2 years ago. So Zach asked Auckland Council's governance support manager, Oliver Roberts, why meetings are catered.
They can have the break, they can have some food so they can keep going. And we can restart the meeting as quickly and efficiently as we can. It also means having the food on site means that they can actually have a chat with their colleagues about some of the issues that have come up.
Who can eat it? So these meetings are often or mostly public. Can a member of the public who's there attending go down and eat the food?
No. So the food's there for the councillors. Sometimes senior staff will join them so that they can discuss issues that have come up. But really it's there for the councillors, as for the decision makers. Right. They're the ones around the table. They can't move while the meeting's happening.
Yeah, the people there actually working.
Yes.
You mentioned before that there's been a 1/3 reduction in spending over the past 2 years. What is that a result of? Why has that been reduced?
It's just over a third, yeah. So we're really pleased at the amount of reduction that we've had. And that's a mix of different things. It's reducing when we offer the food, it's reducing the amount of food we offer, and it's the ongoing efficiencies in our catering team as well.
And why have there been a focus on reducing those costs?
For the same reason that we focus on reducing costs everywhere. Though.
Sure. And is there plans to try and reduce that spending further? Or potentially get rid of the catering lunches full stop?
No, we're not looking to get rid of the catering lunches. They make a lot of sense. It's really valuable for us to have food on hand so that the councillors can break, meet, chat, refresh, and come back and start the meeting again and get back to business.
Sure, you can appreciate that some people would say, the Auckland Town Hall is almost in the middle of CBD. There's a couple of food courts around and lots of cafes where they could go and, pull up a table and have a chat.
Within the amount of time that it would take to get somewhere, order, get the food, wander back and so on, the speed and the efficiency that we can get from having the food on hand is much, much greater.
The country's two next biggest councils, Christchurch and Wellington, don't cater lunches. To drive efficiency in those cities, councillors are asked to bring their own lunch. They provide tea, coffee and sometimes biscuits. Numbers weren't readily available, but it's estimated to cost around $2,000 to $3,000 a year, significantly less than the figure of around 150 grand ratepayers are forking out for lunch in Auckland. Marine farmers are being urged to limit the movement of boats and equipment after the discovery of a parasite that has the potential to devastate New Zealand's famous multi-million-dollar oyster fishery. Bonamia austriae has turned up at 2 oyster farms in Stewart Island, and fishery officials are trying to stop it spread across Fovo Strait to wild oyster fisheries. An aquaculture manager at Nelson Research Institute says the parasite can quickly take hold, but it's not yet clear how or why it occurs. Here's our Nelson reporter, Tracy Neal.
The Ministry for Primary Industry says the strain of parasite first appeared in flat oysters in the Marlborough Sounds 2 years ago, but this is the first time it's been found in flat oysters in another area. Dr. Sarah-Ann Adams of the Cawthron Institute says there are 3 species of oyster grown in New Zealand.
The bluff oyster, and that occurs throughout New Zealand, so it's got different names. It's also known as the flat oyster, or the Nelson oyster. We've got Pacific oysters, and that's the main one that's farmed in New Zealand. And then we also have the rock oyster, and that was the early aquaculture industry was actually based on that species.
Dr. Adams says the parasite begins in the oyster's blood cells and develops into a lethal disease, but it's not known how it gets into oyster farms.
We know from some overseas research about how it can survive at different temperatures and how different aged oysters are affected, but that's all based on a different oyster species. It's not with our species.
MPI says the parasite was found after routine surveillance set up after the outbreak in Marlborough. Biosecurity Manager Brendan Gould says the ministry has taken immediate steps to try and stop its spread.
We have reissued the controlled area notice that we have around Marlborough, and we've now included Stewart Island in that. And we've also extended within Stewart Island that controlled area to include the movement of equipment and vessels associated with those farms.
Mr. Gould says it's a naturally occurring parasite which is easily spread through ocean currents and on vessels. Graham Wright of the Bluff Oyster Management Company says it's now a waiting game to see if it will spread to their wild fishery.
It made it from overseas to Melbourne, and it's made it from Melbourne to Stewart Island. And, literally the Big Glory Bay, the mouth of that is, literally, as the crow flies, probably less than a mile or 2 miles from where there's commercial oyster beds. The risk of it spreading, has to be extremely high.
Mr. Gould says farmers have reacted quickly to try and stop the spread.
Those affected down south and in Marlborough have been, really helpful. They recognise the impact that this will have on them and those, operating around them. So they've been really, proactive in managing the risks themselves as well, and they're working closely with us.
Sarah-Ann Adams from the Cawthron says the flat oyster industry is still in its infancy compared with other aquaculture species, but there are high hopes for it. She says while it's a serious situation, overseas research suggests selective breeding can help in the war against this invader.
You can see from the overseas experience that they're starting to get, with their selective breeding, they've demonstrated that they can get disease resilience to this parasite.
But Graham Wright says oysters are tricky creatures and building tolerance in farmed oysters could leave wild fisheries vulnerable.
It is New Zealand's most iconic seafood, I would suggest. It is New Zealand's oldest commercial fishery. It's been, harvested since the days of sailing cutters in 1865. It's worth some effort to save. And how will Bonamia austriae affect it? Who knows? Time will tell.
The Bluff flat oyster fishery is currently valued at $22 million a year, and it's seen as a key driver behind reaching $1 billion worth of aquaculture industry sales by 2025. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
11 minutes to 6, we're going to look at some sport now. It's going to be Gatlin versus Gatlin this weekend after Lions coach Warren Gatlin's son was named in the provincial Barbarian side, taking on the Tourists. The British and Irish Lions are gearing up for a really busy schedule in New Zealand. The first game is in Whangarei on Saturday night. Warren Gatlin says he's looking forward to seeing how his son goes, but admits his main focus will be on the side he's coaching. Sally Murphy reports.
Bryn Gatlin to North Harbour First 5 will start for the Barbarians on Saturday, squaring off against his own father. Warren Gatlin says it hasn't even been talked about within the family.
I spoke to him last night and he's been enjoying the week, so I think we'll catch up tomorrow, and he probably can expect to have to make a few tackles on the weekend and that, but we haven't spoken too much about the game, and obviously he's pretty excited about the opportunity to if he does get a chance to play against us, and looking forward to seeing how he goes there.
He says he's excited to see how his own lineup goes against his son's side.
Our first focus at the moment is the first 3 games, giving everyone a chance, looking at a couple of combinations, because that's important with the lack of preparation time, and then we'll start thinking a little bit more about the Saturday games and possibly the Maoris, and then towards the first test.
The problem is most New Zealanders are unfamiliar with the Lions side. At the press conference today, Gatlin was asked what he thought of a recent survey which found 78% of New Zealanders could not name one Lions player.
Most people in New Zealand still think that the rugby in the Northern Hemisphere is played in 6 inches of mud and pouring down with rain as well, so that's our task, that's our job, to come to New Zealand and earn some respect and hopefully play some good rugby, and if we can reduce that number from 78 to 77, then that's been some success.
New Zealand-born Gatlin says he has a strong focus on educating his team about his home country as part of the tour, which includes watching New Zealand movies and learning the local customs. Player Alan Wynne-Jones says practising songs to sing as a response to Māori welcomes has brought the team closer together.
Choir practice, loving it, to be honest with you. It's really good. I think Jerusalem's probably the most tricky one because it's got more words than any of the rest, but it's actually harder doing the choir than it is learning the lineups. So, but no, it's been good. I think we're getting more confident. The more confident we get, the better we'll get. So watch this space.
The Lions have also named their side for this Saturday's first of 10 tour matches. Captain Sam Warburton will lead the side, while New Zealand-born Island centre Jared Payne, who spent 3 seasons with Northland, has been named on the bench. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
That Jerusalem certainly is a stirring song. Now, when the Lions begin their tour of New Zealand with the game in Whangarei on Saturday night, the crowd will contain a 93-year-old man who understands exactly what it's like to play against that famous team of visiting stars. Richard Langdon did exactly that in 1950. It was close. The Lions only beat North Auckland by 8-6, and the ref's whistle denied the boys from the north what looked like a fair try. Richard says he wasn't overawed because one of his teammates had played against some of the Lions for the All Blacks, and he reckoned they were just mortal flesh and bone like them.
Well, captain and that, he'd played against quite a few of those guys over in England after the war. And he gave a speech before we went on, and he said, look, I've played against these guys. He said, they're no better than you, so we'll just get out there and get stuck into them, and that was it. But, they had a good crowd there. It was I think it was about 12,000 or something, which was pretty good for Whangarei way back then.
Yeah, 1950, yeah.
So, anyway, but, they were running the ball pretty well, and so were we. We were pretty open sort of side with the guys we had, those Smiths and Sherrington and those sort of guys.
You had the Smith brothers, didn't you?
Yeah, they were both very good, and they'd throw the ball around all over the place. And there was Doc Kaiwai, he was another one. He was a Mormon, he'd been over to America, and he played football in America, and he could throw the ball anywhere. So, and they just kept throwing the ball around, and our forwards were holding their own, and that was about it, I think, that, right.
67 years ago.
Yeah, is it that long?
I think so. My maths is pretty rubbish, but I think 1950, 2017, right? I think that's 67 years.
Right, yeah.
And you're going to be there on Saturday, which will be magic, won't it?
Oh, yes, good, yeah. They've been very good. the rugby union is very good, you know. And they've given us about 3 tickets there for up in the top, you know, in the main boxes or whatever it is. And there's me and my son-in-law, the 3 of us are going, so it'll be good.
It'll be magic.
Yeah.
Absolutely magic.
They're turning on quite a good, I don't know what it is, a banquet before we go to the game, and then afterwards as well. So.
A few club sandwiches, do you reckon?
It better be better than about quarter of an orange we got at half time, you know. Like.
Did you get quarter of an orange at half time, did you?
Well, you didn't come off the field, you stayed there.
Well, you were amateurs, Richard. They couldn't get carried away, could they?
Oh, no, we didn't have any money anyway, I don't think.
What is it about the Lions that makes it so exciting when they come to town?
Well, because I suppose it's so different, isn't it? You know, like they're all, you know, in Ireland and England, and you know, they're all mixed up, and they have some pretty good players. And they have this time too, but it's whether they can get them gelled. You know, like the coach, I wouldn't like his job.
No, tough job.
You know, especially for this tour here, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough itinerary. Did you have a beer together after the game?
Yeah. We had a bit of a go there, you know, and they turned on food and stuff, you know, like, and they were good. We had a yarn with them and that, but they didn't like the toiroas and things we had there. I don't think so.
What? You gave them toiroa?
Oh yeah, all sorts, some steamed, fried, and. All sorts of shellfish, but they weren't that keen on shellfish. Somehow or another, I think they might have been a bit warned off shellfish.
Well, that's their loss. More for you boys, right?
Well, you could imagine the Maori boys.
Yep. Well, it's lovely to talk to you, Richard. I hope you have a wonderful day on Saturday.
Yeah, that's good, mate. Okay, right.
Richard Langdon, who played in 1950 against the Lions for Northland in Whangarei. Lots of feedback coming in from both Christchurch and on Auckland Beds. We'll have some of it coming up. But just before we move on, that midnight tweet by Donald Trump, which unleashed such a wave of mocking speculation across social media about what the US president actually meant by writing kofefi, Fifi, in a Twitter post that lingered online for hours. At 12:06 a.m. local time, Donald Trump tweeted, "Despite the constant negative press kofefi," while he was sleeping, comedian Jimmy Kimmel lamented, "What makes me saddest is that I know I'll never write anything funnier than kofefi." And KFC in the UK tweeted in mock shock, "I can't believe it. The final secret ingredient has at last been revealed, a sprinkle of kofefi." The post, since deleted, was followed by a Trump message when he woke up at 6:09 a.m. that sought to put a playful tone on the misfire, saying, "Who can figure out the true meaning of kofefi? Enjoy." And the media certainly has, making the most of it this morning at the White House media briefing when spokesperson Sean Spicer was asked about it.
Do you think people should be concerned that the president posted somewhat of an incoherent tweet last night and that it then stayed up for hours?
No.
Why did it stay up so long? Is no one watching this?
No, I think the president and a small group of people know exactly what he meant.
The original message, which seemed to have been the start of a Trump complaint about media coverage, was trending number one on Twitter for most of the night while the president was, we imagine, deep asleep. Just before we go to the news at 6, and Katrina is sitting beside me, rearing to go, we've got some figures, and they're fascinating, on mental health spending per capita nationwide. So Canterbury, 2016-17, mental health spending per capita, $207 per person. The national average is $251 per person. Now, the risk of PTSD amongst children is up to 5 times higher in some parts of Canterbury, and this is the issue. A per capita amount of $207 relative to a national amount of $251, but greater demand because of 21,000 earthquakes, the aftershock, the stress, the red zone, and all that kind of stuff. And this is the argument being mounted out of Canterbury, that there is simply not enough money being spent on mental health here. These figures that we've just received would tend to support that. Good evening, John. State Mental Health Care, RNZ is the country's preeminent radio station. Unless Jonathan Coleman, as Minister of the Crown, is unaccountable or unwilling to be seen to be accountable, then he should have his pay docked for each unanswered question. Thanks, Alan. Lots of people saying it's unacceptable that Jonathan Coleman refuses to, well, just declines their invitation time after time. Coleman, as Minister of Health, has a constitutional obligation to account for his stewardship. That he refuses to do so on RNZ, one of the most effective programs of media scrutiny, suggests he has something to hide. And this one, thank you for giving our mental health crisis some airtime. My daughter was 11 during the 2011 quake. She's seen finest for a few years, despite the usual trauma down here. Damage to our home, death to a friend, loss of my job as a direct result. School so damaged they had to move on. It was a common story here. We thought she was fine until Valentine's Day last year, when PTSD finally kicked in. She was 17. They were lucky. They got seen by mental health specialty services. Thank you for that email.
RNZ News at 6. Tolofalava, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Auckland councillors opposed to the controversial bed tax say it's flawed and could lead to a legal challenge costing ratepayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. Councillors today voted 11-8 in favour of the targeted rate on accommodation providers. It'll mean motels will have to pay between $1 and $3 per room per night, and hotels up to $6. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says it will take the burden off ratepayers and free up money to pay for much-needed infrastructure. But Councillor Christine Fletcher says it's a desperate move.
To me, this has been clumsy, it's flawed, and I think the net result of it will be that government won't want to have a bar of it, and we will never get around to getting the visitor levy.
Christine Fletcher. The police say they're speaking to one person of interest in relation to the missing Christchurch man, Michael McGrath, who vanished almost 2 weeks ago. Mr McGrath, who's a builder, was last seen at his home in Horswell, where he lives alone. Officers searched 2 houses yesterday as part of the investigation and have forensically examined 3 vehicles. Detective Inspector Daryl Sweeney held a news conference in the last hour, telling reporters they're still hoping to find the missing 49-year-old alive.
We can confirm we have been talking to a person of interest in the last 2 days who needs to be eliminated from the inquiry. No arrests have been made. Our focus is on finding Mr McGrath alive, and this is where we need the public's help, please.
Daryl Sweeney says anyone who might have seen Mr McGrath needs to come forward. The government has rejected the suggestion it's responsible for the spread of a parasite that could threaten the bluff oyster industry. Bonamia austriae has been discovered at 2 oyster farms on Stewart Island, the first time it's been found outside of the Marlborough Sounds and Nelson. The Greens say the government's neglect of biosecurity has made such risks more frequent. But the Primary Industries Minister, Nathan Guy, says the parasite naturally occurs in the ocean.
We've seen it in the wild fishery since the 60s. When you have a look at what's happened with the bluff fishery since about 2000, 2005, on about a 6-yearly cycle, it gets hit. This is easily movable in ocean currents. It is unfortunate.
Nathan Guy says this year's budget invests $18 million in biosecurity. A dairy owner says the government's attempt to curb violent robberies by helping to pay for increased security won't fix the problem. The Police Minister, Paula Bennett, announced a $1.8 million fund this afternoon. 600 shops considered high risk can apply for money to buy things such as panic alarms, fog cannons and safes for cash and cigarettes. The owner of Fruit Veggie Mart in Auckland's Mangere East, John Mu Lee, says he's robbed frequently despite heavy security.
I got everything, security camera, alarm system, padlock, everything here, but they come here.
John Mu Lee says he'd like to see harsher punishments for robbers so they don't reoffend. A High Court judge has reserved his decision in the defamation case between the former leader of the Conservative Party and the blogger Cameron Slater. Justice Toogood says it will take him some time to deliver his judgment, but he'll do it as soon as he can. The The former head of the Conservative Party finished closing his case today, in which he alleges Cameron Slater was part of a conspiracy to remove him as leader. One of the defences Mr Slater has claimed is qualified privilege as a journalist. Mr Craig says privilege is to facilitate public discussion. Justice Toogood says Mr Slater has nothing to gain by Mr Craig standing down, and asked if Mr Slater's motivation in writing the posts has any relevance to the case. A Lower Hutt man has been charged with receiving stolen tickets to an All Blacks Lions test match. The police say they were taken from a letterbox at a Wellington house early last month. A relative of the person who ended up with the tickets tried to sell them on Trade Me, and the police got a tip-off. A man will appear in the Wellington District Court on June the 12th. A massive section of floating ice in Antarctica is about to break away, creating one of the largest known icebergs. Scientists monitoring a large crack which cuts across the Larsen C ice shelf says it's grown significantly in the past week. Dr Sue Cook from the Antarctic Climate and Ecosystems Cooperation Research Centre in Hobart says when it shears off it will create an iceberg 5,000 square kilometres in size.
We're actually incredibly close to it breaking away now. The crack's grown by 16 kilometres in the last week. It's now only 13 kilometres away from creating an iceberg.
Sue Cook says once it breaks off, the ice shelf will lose 10% of its area, which threatens the stability of the rest of the shelf. It's 6:05. To sport, and the British and Irish Lions captain Sam Warburton says he's not concerned about their busy schedule of 10 matches, including 3 All Blacks tests in 36 days. The team will have their first match of their tour against the provincial Barbarians in Whangarei on Saturday. Warburton says players have recovered from jet lag after arriving yesterday and are fully focused on the challenge ahead. He says having 41 players on tour gives them plenty of options.
If you had one squad of 23, then yeah, it would be absolutely brutal, but we've got nearly 2 squads of players, so guys aren't going to be starting Saturday, starting Wednesday and starting again Saturday. So we've got a big squad of top quality players which can sort of deal with that fixture list. So I can see how people from the outside think it's really bad, but I think it's okay.
Lions captain Sam Warburton. Meanwhile, All Blacks Dane Cole's role in the British and Irish Lions tour remains in doubt, with the Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd saying he's unlikely to be available for next weekend's match against the Chiefs, their last before the Lions series. Nehi Milner-Skudder makes his long-awaited return, and fellow All Black Beauden Barrett is back in the Hurricanes side for this Saturday's Super Rugby clash with the Force in Perth. The New Zealand Under-20 football team take on the United States tonight at the Under-20 World Cup in South Korea. If they win, they'll become the first New Zealand side to win a knockout match at a World Cup. And the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball superstar... let's start that again. And the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball superstar LeBron James's Los Angeles home was spray painted with a racial slur just a day before the NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Jeff McNeil talks about his fascination with the First World War Battle of Messines and how it was sparked by the discovery of the skeletal remains of a foot. Alison Balance convenes a summit on the rise of bacteria resistant to antibiotics. And this week's cultural ambassador, Mona Lynn Courteau, presents some songs from the Andes. Don't worry, El Condor Pasa isn't one of them. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers today. Rain with heavy falls developing tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mainly fine, but a few showers west of Tauranga and north of Hamilton tomorrow. Areas of morning fog as well. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Wellington, cloudy periods, the odd shower in the east. Nelson and Buller, mainly fine. Westland, a few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy with the odd shower about the coast. Areas of low cloud or fog. Fiordland, fine but low cloud or fog about the lakes. And for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy with a few showers. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. I was reading an email before 6 and we ran out of time. I'm just going to finish it. So this was the 17-year-old girl. She looked like she was fine, but then she developed symptoms of PTSD. She was 11 when the earthquake hit in 2011. And this is from her parents. We were lucky she got seen by mental health speciality services through the CDHB within a few months of her anxiety, depression and suicidal thoughts. The CDHB was incredible, but way too limited. As parents, we didn't cause this mental health issue. We didn't freak out when aftershocks hit. We didn't smother our kids with anxiety. We just carried on. It still hit us hard. It is a crisis down here, so hard to understand from the beehive. Our young people need more help. Please. Thank you for that email. We are getting a lot of responses. We would love to hear from you. If you have had the experience of mental health services in Christchurch since the earthquake in 2011, you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz or text us 2101 and we are happy to deal with you, obviously, without using names. Let's go to Britain now, which could be on course for a hung parliament in 9 days' time. According to a new poll, boy, they've been changing fast. The YouGov poll shows the Conservatives could fall 16 seats short of the 326 seats needed for an overall majority, while the resurgent Labour Party and its leader Jeremy Corbyn could be in line to gain 29 seats, according to YouGov, end up with a total of 257. This is still a long shot, but that could put Labour in a position to start stitching up a deal to govern. Who would have thought that not terribly long ago? Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, didn't do herself any favours today. She decided not to take part in a televised debate of party leaders, instead choosing to focus on the campaign trail. This report from the BBC's political editor.
London, 9 a.m. Days to go. A rare sight these days, an old-fashioned press conference. Labour attacking the Tories on public services.
Patients are suffering ever longer waits and overcrowded wards. Those who need care have been left without it. A&E, maternity units and whole hospitals are threatened with closure. Children are crammed into overcrowded and crumbling classrooms. Schools are sending home begging letters to the parents. It has to change.
Rather than preparing or even considering tonight's big debate, Theresa May was up early with the boats. Then a campaign classic, sampling the produce at a county show. Notably, the Prime Minister on the road today in parts of the country, the southwest, the Tories are trying to defend. But elsewhere, Labour and the leaders' crowds are enjoying being the insurgent underdog.
It's about 11:30 and we're on the road in Reading. This rally of people packed, waiting to hear from Jeremy Corbyn.
It's just a case of vote for me. Not that horrible man. But I've come to see the horrible man because he's not horrible. He's very sensible.
He's like really relatable to people and like he understands what like the young people really want.
Their heroes welcome, ready to commit that he will debate with or without the PM.
I invite her to go to Cambridge and debate her policies, debate her record, debate their plans, debate their proposals, and let the public make up their mind.
On the move, but heading the other way. The Prime Minister won't respond to heckles or agree to those chanted demands to show her face tonight. Staff at this factory in Bath did try to put her on the spot, but applauded when she was asked about not showing tonight. But could she really laugh it off?
Look, first of all, I've been taking Jeremy Corbyn on directly, week in and week out in Prime Minister's questions. Secondly, actually, yes, public scrutiny is for an election campaign, but that's why taking questions from members of the public who are going to be voting on the 8th of June is so important.
The risk, she just looks scared.
Isn't your decision not to take part in the debate tonight a bit of a metaphor for your whole campaign? You're very happy to repeatedly criticise the Labour Party, but for your own plans, you're reluctant to give us very much detail at all, whether that's on Brexit, your future immigration system, how many people will lose your winter fuel allowance. Don't people want more from you? Because you're basically saying, on many of these big issues, I'll get back to you.
I think what we owe to people is to be open with them about the challenges we face as a society and as a country, and be open with them about the solutions that we're offering.
But in campaigns, the path is so often less smooth for those who start out in front.
That's the BBC's excellent political editor, Laura Koonsberg. Auckland Council has voted in favour of Phil Goff's controversial bed tax. As we heard when the program began just over an hour ago, the Mayor has pushed the tax, saying the council cannot keep burdening ratepayers with high rate increases to pay for the city's infrastructure needs. He says the targeted rate would be fairer for ratepayers, as it would cover half the $26 million of the cost of promotion and marketing budget for the council's tourism arm, ATEED. Now, Rachel Shadbolt is the General Manager of Accommodation for Hospitality New Zealand. She joins us now live on the phone. Are you there, Rachel?
I am.
Nice to talk to you. What do you make of this vote by the Auckland Council?
Oh, devastated. Actually devastated on behalf of my operators up in Auckland who can't afford this.
Right. How do you know they can't afford it?
Well, would you like to be waking up on the 1st of July and discover that you've got $20,000 extra rates that you have to pay to council?
And who? So it's not $20,000 each, is it? So where's the figure of $20,000 come from? Who? Give me an example of somebody who would be paying that extra.
Okay, so we've got an inner city motel with a capital value of $3.6 million. So that's where the targeted rate's on. It's on the capital value. They're facing a targeted rate bill of around $30,000, and that's additional to the $24,000 they already pay in commercial rates. So they're facing 125% rates increase, which is a lot different to the 2.5 that Mayor Goff seems to be promising everyone.
Well, the 2.5 is for domestic rates, isn't it? So what do you think this will mean for that? So it's rated on the value, commercial value?
Yeah, it's rated on the capital value.
Capital value, sorry.
Building. Yeah.
Right. So what will it mean for a business like that? They'll simply pass it on, won't they?
Well, they can't. You can't pass on fixed costs. Very, very difficult thing to do. And they certainly can't pass it on as a surcharge, which is what the council has been asserting that you can do. We'd be treading a very fine line with the Fair Trading Act and the Commerce Act if we were doing that.
Right. So what will happen, do you think?
They'll probably have to absorb, and they'll probably certainly have to look at all of their other costs and start to think about where they can actually save some costs to actually be able to pay the targeted rate. Some have told me that they may even have to take loans to service it, which is certainly not what you'd want to see happening.
Are you saying there shouldn't be some form of bed tax? There shouldn't be some form of levy on tourists who get to use Auckland infrastructure effectively for free? I guess they're paying GST, but that's the totality of their contribution, right?
I think if this was a bed tax discussion, we probably wouldn't be quite as incandescent about it. This is a targeted rate discussion. A bed tax can be charged directly to the person sleeping in the bed, or a visitor levy, one of those things. But a targeted rate often doesn't go anywhere near the visitor, because a targeted rate is paid by the person who owns the building and pays the rates. So for hotels, quite often it's the building owner. For moteliers, unfortunately, it is the moteliers, so they will be the ones most impacted. Look,
we've got a fascinating email from a listener, Professor Jürgen Noth, who's Department of Marketing at the University of Otago, down in Dunedin, obviously. And he says the bed tax should not be treated as an isolated issue, that there is a thin edge of the wedge here, and that we need to have a debate about how to manage the dock estate, our domains, our beaches, our riverbanks, from which we are increasingly displaced. In other words, and actually Nona and I were discussing this, about 45 minutes ago, tourism is now the biggest foreign exchange earner for this country, and dairy is second. And it provides an enormous amount of jobs. But there is a cost, and there has been... this email suggests an almost reckless disregard of the cost and impact of the increasing number of tourists coming to New Zealand, as well as the benefits. How do we manage that?
So he was suggesting that a bed tax for a visitor levy was something that should be considered?
Well, some form of levy,
right,
nationwide, something that says, OK, as well as the direct income from the money these tourists spend, we are also going to offset the cost to our conservation state, to our rivers, to our beaches, to our roads, to, through some form of levy. Is there anything you would be prepared to accept?
Oh, look, we are prepared to have very open conversations about fair and equitable contribution to the tourism industry. The proposal Auckland's put up is not fair and equitable because it's only the commercial accommodation sector being pinged for it. A visitor levy discussion is something that we would like to have at a national level, even if it's just to have the discussion completely and decide whether we're going for it one way or the other. I think he's right with the thin edge of the wedge, particularly with this targeted rate. You can't tell me other councils around the country aren't watching Auckland with interest and thinking, oh, I wonder if that's a good idea. We'd urge them to think that it's not.
Is there a model overseas that you like? Because often you pay at a hotel, you pay some kind of levy or some kind of extra, don't you? Is there anything that you think is working when you travel?
Look, overseas they do have the bed taxes and they do have the visitor levies. I guess a bed tax comes back to it again that it's only the commercial accommodation providers who end up collecting that rate, and where are the other people in tourism collecting or contributing. A visitor levy, which is obviously more like a border levy, is probably more equitable in that everybody contributes. But look, we just want to have a really good national discussion about it. Otherwise we're going to end up having to have a million, targeted rate discussions with various councils, and it's quite onerous.
How would that discussion be led?
Look, it has to absolutely come from the top, and it would have to be a working party of like-minded tourism individuals.
So you're not opposed to that sort of discussion per se? You would participate in it? Okay, so that,
yep.
In fact, are you calling for it?
Well, we did ask for it in our submission to the Auckland Council, and we have been making similar noises at central government level as well.
Have you talked to Paula Bennett, Minister Bennett?
It has been mooted, yes.
Okay, and the previous tourism minister was, of course, John Key. How did you go in discussions with him?
I think we were getting a little bit warmer with John Key. He certainly didn't seem to be opposed to it. Minister Bennett just probably hasn't really made a decision as yet, and certainly not this side of the elections. Rachel Shadbolt, who is the Accommodation General Manager for Hospitality New Zealand, thank you so much for joining us live. So, not opposed to some kind of levy per se, but certainly opposed to what the Auckland Council have voted for this afternoon. We'd love your feedback on all of this. Let's go back to Kabul. The Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has condemned a massive bomb attack in the capital, which killed at least 90 people as cowardly. Some 400 people were injured. The death toll certainly expected to rise. It was a suicide truck bomb attack in the diplomatic quarter. The massive blast was caused by explosives hidden inside a sewage tanker, which was allowed to slip into the heavily fortified area without raising any suspicions. Bridget Burke reports.
The Eiffel Tower lights were switched off just before midnight in honour of the victims of the Kabul truck explosion. The powerful bomb, hidden in a sewage tanker, exploded in the morning rush hour in the centre of the city, killing at least 80 people, wounding more than 460 others, and damaging embassy buildings in the Afghan capital's unofficial green zone. The victims of the explosion at a busy intersection appeared mainly to have been Afghan civilians on their way to work or school, including office workers whose nearby buildings did not have the protection of the blast walls that fortify the zone. These office workers describe what happened.
I was working in the office when a powerful blast occurred. I collapsed under the desk and received injuries from shattered windows. Many of my colleagues were also wounded by the glass.
I was at my desk when I heard a terrible sound and became unconscious. I didn't know what happened to me, and a few minutes later when I opened my eyes, I found myself under the desk and saw blood coming out of my shoulder. It was a dreadful explosion.
At local hospitals, the wounded occupied every bed, and outside, residents of the diplomatic district came forward to donate blood. Hamid waited in line for 3 hours.
Due to some security issues, we were not allowed to come directly to the hospital. And guys were all gathering like about 500 meters above the road. And we, maybe 30 minutes after we came to the hospital, and 3 hours later, my turn came.
Representatives from China, France and Turkey said that their embassy personnel had not been injured in the explosion, but all were considering relocating staff because of the repairs that would be needed to their buildings. China's foreign ministry condemned the attack, saying it would work with Afghanistan and the international community to together strike against terrorism. The Afghan Deputy Interior Minister Murad Ali Murad said intelligence officers were working to establish who was behind the attack after several groups claimed responsibility. The NATO-led Resolute Support mission in Kabul said Afghan security forces prevented the vehicle carrying the bomb from entering the heavily protected green zone that houses many foreign embassies as well as its headquarters, suggesting it may not have reached its intended target. The blast at the start of the holy month of Ramadan is one of the capital's deadliest. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
NASA has revealed details of an unprecedented mission to the Sun, or close to it. The Parker solar probe will fly right into the Sun's atmosphere and will be exposed to more heat and radiation than any spacecraft ever built. With the details of this remarkable expedition, here's the BBC science editor, David Shookman.
To understand the daring nature of this mission, bear in mind a few key numbers. Earth orbits the Sun at a distance of 91 million miles. Mercury is much closer at about 21 million. But the NASA Solar Probe Plus will get to within 4 million miles. This is uncharted and extremely hostile territory. The spacecraft will have to endure a temperature of nearly 1,400 degrees Celsius, the kind of heat generated inside a blast furnace in a steelworks. So the craft has special protection, a shield of carbon composite about 4.5 inches thick. But the slightest error in its flight and the instruments sheltering behind the shield will be fried. Today, the mission scientist, Nikki Fox, said everything was on course for launch next year.
Solar Probe is going to be the hottest, fastest mission. I like to call it the coolest, hottest mission under the sun. We are going to be moving at blistering temperatures. We are going to go right up into the corona.
The motivation for flying so close to the sun is to explain some of the mysteries about it. Why, for example, the greatest heat is not at the surface, but in the corona, a region surrounding the sun. It's here that vast flares are generated that can send streams of particles our way, which can disrupt anything electronic, including satellites or power grids. Understanding this so-called space weather is seen as vitally important to our modern economies, and getting very close is the best way to do that.
BBC's David Shookman reporting. It's an announcement everyone is waiting for, and it will be a big one when it comes. The US President Donald Trump appears poised to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. The landmark 2015 agreement was signed by 195 countries. Donald Trump, who has suggested climate change is a hoax, promised to pull out of the accord during the presidential campaign. Here's our correspondent Harry Horton from Washington.
As is often the case in Washington these days, Wednesday began with a tweet. President Donald Trump said he'd announce his decision on whether the US would withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Agreement within the next few days. But US media quoted several senior White House officials as saying the president was ready to ditch the deal, fulfilling a campaign promise to roll back environmental regulations and boost economic growth. The news prompted a flurry of last-minute lobbying to try and persuade Donald Trump to change his mind. Jake Schmitz from the Natural Resources Defense Council was in Paris when the accord was signed 2 years ago. He said the US pulling out would be a disaster.
I think if Trump decides to pull out, it'll be a huge signal to the rest of the world that he's not serious about acting on climate change and he wants to cede leadership to other countries. It'll also, I think, send a very terrible signal to our children and grandchildren about whether or not they're serious about, putting us in a safer trajectory for the future. And for American businesses, I think it, clearly signals that they may have a challenge tapping into these global clean energy markets because the U.S. will be sort of out of the game in some sense.
Mitt Romney, a former Republican presidential nominee, said affirmation of the agreement was about global leadership. Elon Musk, the boss of tech company Tesla, said he would quit the White House advisory group he sits on if Donald Trump decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. But when the president himself was quizzed by journalists in the Oval Office, he gave no clues about his decision.
Very soon. You're going to find out very soon. Thank you all very much. I'm hearing from a lot of people. Both ways. Both ways, believe me.
And so Washington finds itself abuzz with speculation. Donald Trump the centre of attention once more. An intense lobbying effort will continue over the coming days as the president ponders over perhaps the most consequential decision of his administration so far. For Checkpoint, I'm Harry Horton in Washington.
Thanks, Harry. Donald Trump has now said he will announce his decision tomorrow. That's overnight Friday, New Zealand time. Just before we leave, what is it in the US? Saturday Night Fever dance floor, where John Travolta captured the 1970s disco craze. Future President John Travolta obviously captured the 1970s disco craze, is going up for sale next month and is expected to sell for $1.5 million. The dance floor that lit up in red, blue and yellow in rhythm to the music was custom built for the 1977 film featuring disco hits by the Bee Gees, including Night Fever and You Should Be Dancing. The floor, measuring 7 metres by 5 metres, has more than 250 separate light compartments. Vito Bruno, who owns the floor, said he started his career at the 2001 Odyssey, the club in Brooklyn, where Saturday Night Fever was filmed. The club closed in 2005, and Mr. Bruno says it's now time to share one of the most recognisable pieces of film memorabilia and history with the world. Saturday Night Fever, the story of a working-class Brooklyn youth trying to break out of his dead-end life through dancing, launched John Travolta as an international movie star. It was the first R16 I ever saw. Travolta rehearsed for months to perfect his dance moves, and his white-suited disco dancer became one of the enduring images of the 1970s disco scene. The dance floor will go up for auction in Los Angeles during the Profiles in History Hollywood auction later this month. John Travolta really was wearing slacks. Quite extraordinary. Mayor Goff should tell the whinging hotel magnates that if they mount a legal challenge, the council's costs will come from the AT tourism promotion budget, of which they are the main beneficiaries. I'm a regular business traveller to Auckland, and as such, I've been regularly buying nights in Central City hotel rooms for over 20 years. In the last 12 months, hotel rooms have gone up about 50% in Auckland, or $100 a night because of a shortage of beds. Hoteliers have had no trouble putting an extra $100 a night in their own pockets, so a few dollars more for targeted rates seems achievable. How much did hotels hike their prices for the Lions to? If they can do that, then adding a few dollars to a room rate for targeted rates doesn't seem too hard. Lots of you saying that. Thank you, Benedict. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police say they're speaking to a person of interest in relation to a missing Christchurch builder. Auckland councillors opposed to a controversial bed tax could lead to a legal challenge costing ratepayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. The government rejects suggestions it's responsible for the spread of a parasite that could threaten the bluff oyster industry. Labor says dairy owners want more police on the streets, not funding to help pay for extra security. Donald Trump looks poised to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement in a move that would isolate the United States. And new government property figures continue to show that about 3% of house sales are to people who are overseas tax residents. Our next news and weather is at 7.
In 25 years, our economy will look nothing like it does today.
There's no question that the vast majority of things that humans are doing today are going to be replaced.